So we want to continue with our discussion on the key areas that we have to focus on to pass the examination. In the first video, we discussed the issues about the ethics. In case you missed that, you can check the description of this video and be able to watch that. Now we want to look at the second part of our examination, and that is going to be the accounting standards. Financial reporting and corporate reporting, it's going to be fundamentally based on the accounting standards. So your ability to be able to understand the accounting standards and be able to accurately apply the accounting standards is going to be very important. Three things I want you to take away always. Number one is that when you read a question, you should be able to, or you read the note, you should be able to identify the accounting standard. Number two, you should be able to remember the principles. And then number three, you should be able to know how to apply the principles based on the context of the question. So for every note, for every statement relating to the standards, one, you must identify the standard. Two, remember the principles. Three, apply the principles based on the context of the question. So what are the key accounting standards that we have to focus on to increase our chances of passing the examination? Number one, primarily, is IAS 16. That is property, plants, and equipment. This is a fundamental accounting standard, and whether you like it or not, you are going to be applying something relating to IAS 16, especially for the financial reporting students. IAS 16 property, plant, and equipment is fundamental, and there are a couple of things that we must understand under IAS 16. Number one is the recognition of assets. Now, remember, assets will be recognized based on a certain recognition criteria. So the general recognition criteria is that the item or the transaction that can be recognized as an asset, number one, should meet the definition of an asset. Now, what is an asset? Assets are resources that are controlled by an entity as a result of past events from which future economic benefits will flow to the entity. But the key thing is that assets are resources controlled by the entity, not owned by the entity, controlled by the entity, because an entity can have access to assets that will be coming in because of lease or will be coming in because they outrightly bought the asset. Number two is that the cost can be reliably measured. Okay, so number one, it meets the definition of an asset, resources controlled by an entity. Number two, the cost or fair value can reliably be measured, and then suddenly future economic benefits of the asset will flow to the entity. That is the recognition criteria. Then the second thing we must note about is the initial measurement of assets. In accordance with IAS 16, property, plant, and equipment, the initial cost of an asset shall be the purchases cost and all other directly attributable costs incurred in bringing the assets to its present use. What does that mean? It means that, let's say an entity purchased an asset. So what should be included in the initial cost of the asset? Number one will be the purchases price, less any trade discounts received. Number two will be delivery costs. Cost of bringing the assets to the present use. Number three will be any legal or professional fees that the entity incurs, because sometimes it depends on the kind of asset the entity is buying. We may require the assistance, the consultancy, or the services of a legal practitioner or other professionals to recommend how we should sign the contract, how we should, what kind of assets we are supposed to buy. So those costs that we incur on legal fees and other professional fees must be included in the initial cost of the asset. Not only that, if the asset will require some installation, then certainly cost of installation or cost of installing the asset must be included in the initial cost of the asset. Then certainly sometimes at the end of the economic useful life of the asset, which is how long we expect the assets to remain active and be used in the economic activities of the entity, the asset may have to be dismantled. For that reason, IAS 37 provisions with IAS 16 property, plant, and equipment requires that we will discount the future amount that we are going to pay to dismantle the asset into present term and include that in the initial cost of the asset. Sometimes when an entity is going to acquire or procure an asset, it may not have the necessary funding to be able to pay for the asset. For that reason, the borrowing cost in accordance with IAS 23, when we borrowed funds to acquire qualifying assets or we manufacture qualifying assets, then we would have to include the borrowing cost into the initial cost of the asset as well. So when we talk about the initial cost of the asset, that is what we mean: the purchases cost or the manufacturing cost plus all other directly attributable costs incurred in bringing the asset to its present location or present condition. So if you are a good student, you realize that just between that, there are two standards that we are bringing in: IAS 23 borrowing cost, meaning that the cost of the funds that we borrowed in order to finance the acquisition, the manufacturing, or the construction of the qualifying asset. And then number two, any environmental cost, dismantling cost that we will incur at the end of the economic useful life of the asset, we discount it into present term and include it in the initial cost of the asset. So that is initial measurement. Then after the initial measurement, we need to go to what we call subsequent measurement. Now on subsequent measurement, IAS 16 provides that there are two approaches that an entity can use. That is the cost model and the revaluation model. So these are the two approaches available that an entity can use, or methods available: cost model and the revaluation model. What does that mean? The cost model simply means that the asset is going to be carried at its historical cost. Remember, when we say an asset is being carried at its historical cost, it simply means the initial cost we incurred in acquiring the asset, which is the initial measurement we looked at earlier. So under the cost model, the asset is going to be carried at the historical cost less any accumulated depreciation or impairment. Less any accumulated depreciation or impairment. Under the revaluation model, it is where assets are going to be carried at their fair value, less any accumulated depreciation or impairment. So these are the two things. Now, even though these are the methods available, cost model and revaluation model, it is important for the entity to decide which model will be appropriate for a specific class of assets. And once we adopt that model, it will relate to specific class of assets, because in practice, assets are put into classes and the accounting method or principle will apply to those class of assets. So for instance, what are the conditions, or what are the requirements, or what are the circumstances under which the cost model will be appropriate and under which the revaluation model will be appropriate? Let's look at some circumstances where the asset is of a specialized nature and will require significant modification before it can be used by another entity. Then it is required that the entity will carry the asset using the cost model. What does that mean? The asset is customized. The asset is in the name of the company. The asset is specially created for the company. So should we even sell it to another company, they will incur a lot of cost in order to modify that particular asset. So in that case, the entity will carry the asset at the cost model, or using the cost model, and carry the asset at its historical cost less any accumulated depreciation or impairment. But where the asset has a market, an active market where there are buyers and sellers, and the fair value of the asset can reliably be measured, then the entity would use the revaluation model or the fair value model. So is there market available? Are there buyers and sellers? Can the fair value of the asset be reliably measured? If yes, then we will use the revaluation model or the fair value model to account for the asset. So that is also another circumstance under which it can be used. So fair value model and the cost model. Note that even though these are the two models available, IAS 16 give guidelines that at least once a year, an entity must revalue its assets. The reason is that assets should not be carried above their recoverable amounts. Assets should not be carried above their recoverable amounts. And I'm going to get into that in a moment so you understand exactly how that applies. Now, you realize that irrespective of the model we are using, two things are coming up: depreciation and impairment. So whether you are using the cost model or the revaluation model, you may have to charge depreciation or test for impairment as well. And that means that some accounting standards are coming to town. So let's first talk about depreciation. What is depreciation? In a simple language, we say that depreciation refers to the allocation of the total cost of the asset over its economic useful life. Allocation of the total cost of the asset over its economic useful life. So with depreciation also, there are various methods that can be used. But the two famous methods that will be used will be the straight line method and the reducing balance method. What is the distinction between these two? With the straight line method, depreciation is calculated on the cost of the asset, whilst with revaluation or the reducing balance method, depreciation is calculated using the carrying amount. Let's take that again. Under the straight line method, depreciation is calculated on the cost of the asset. But under the reducing balance method, depreciation is calculated on the carrying amount. Carrying amount. Then in the straight line method, the same amount of depreciation is charged over the economic useful life of the asset. So what is the trick here? In the straight line method, it is going to be the cost of the asset minus the scrap value or the terminal value or residual value divided by the economic useful life of the asset. Or the examiner will give you a percentage, and that could be 20%, 15%, or whatever percent, and then you apply it directly on the cost of the asset. The second thing is going to be the reducing balance. With the reducing balance, we are saying that depreciation should be calculated on the carrying amount. In other words, to calculate depreciation, we'll subtract any accumulated depreciation from the cost to get a carrying amount or the carrying value. And on that carrying amount or carrying value, we will going to apply the percentage and get the depreciation for the period under review. So that is the straight line method and reducing balance method. There is also the production unit method, where we use that method if the outputs to be generated from the assets can reliably be measured. So where the outputs to be produced from the assets can reliably be measured, then we could calculate depreciation using the production unit method. In that case, what it means is that we will calculate depreciation per unit, and that will be the total cost of the asset divided by the total production unit over the economic useful life of the asset, and that will give us the depreciation per unit. Then for a period, we will calculate depreciation based on the units produced. So then you will multiply the depreciation per unit by the units produced for that period, then you'll get your total depreciation for that period. So that is the production unit method, another way we can calculate depreciation. Then we have the sum of year digits. The sum of year digits works like the reducing balance method, only that we're going to be applying the sum of year principle in calculating our figures in that regard. So that is depreciation. Then there is also impairment. What is impairment? An asset is said to have suffered an impairment when the carrying amount of the asset is above the recoverable amount, and that is in accordance with IAS 36, impairment of assets. So when the carrying amount of the asset in our books is greater than the recoverable amount, we say the asset has suffered an impairment. Please note, where the carrying amount is greater than the recoverable amount, that is where there is impairment. But where the recoverable amount is greater than the carrying amount, the asset will still be carried at its carrying amount. So take that very well. When the asset's recoverable amount is greater than the carrying amount, the asset is still carried at its carrying amount. There is no revaluation of assets and there is no impairment in that particular case. But how do we calculate recoverable amounts? Recoverable amount is simply the higher of value in use and then fair value less cost to sell. What does that mean? It means that to be able to get a recoverable amount, we ask ourselves two questions. Question number one, if the assets that we are dealing with, we sell it today, how much will we get? That is the net fair value less cost to sell, which is the same as the net realizable value. So if we should sell that asset today, how much will we get? And so that will be the fair value of the asset minus cost to sell. Or if we decide not to sell the asset today and we decide to continue to use it in our operations, how much cash flow would we expect, or are we expecting to generate from the continuous usage of the asset? That is the second thing. That is the value in use. And because that is an expected cash flow, we are going to discount that into present term using the pre-tax cost of capital of the entity. We discount that into present term. So you compare the value in use with the net realizable value. The one that is higher becomes the recoverable amount, and you compare that recoverable amount with the carried amount to determine whether the asset has suffered an impairment or not. Once we get our impairment amount, guess what? We would have to allocate it, because remember, an impairment or assets can suffer impairment, and cash generating units can also suffer impairment. When we say cash generating unit, we simply mean group of assets which together can generate cash flow for the entity. Group of assets which together can generate cash flow for an entity. So for instance, my camera, my microphone, my iPad can be referred to as a cash generating unit, because together these can generate revenue, income independently, as we are using it to create these contents, which will definitely generate inflows for us at the end of the day through monetization on YouTube and our various other platforms, as well as our paid program. So that is a cash generating unit. So an asset can suffer an impairment, a whole cash generating unit, a department, a business, or group of assets can also suffer impairment. So where a cash generating unit, a department, a business suffers an impairment, then we would have to find out how we can allocate the impairment loss that we have calculated. How do we allocate that? One is that the separately identified impaired asset, as stated in the question, which has suffered an impairment, we will write it off. That's the first thing you do. Second, if there is still amount left, any goodwill on the financial statement would have to be written off. If there is still an impairment left after we write off goodwill, then suddenly we will allocate the goodwill on the remaining assets on a pro rata basis. In that case, what is going to happen is that things like cash, trade receivable, trade payable, they don't suffer impairment. I'll catch you in the next broadcast.